Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of our Coaching Conversations. I'm here with Carolia Martino and Jillian Simkis. And today we've decided to speak about listening. So with everything that has been going on the last few months, and even more specifically in the last week, we felt this was a very timely topic to be discussing, and one that can be a great challenge to think about: how to be an effective listener, how to make sure that you are really zoning in and being attentive to what it is that you're hearing. So we wanted to share with you this piece of information, which is pretty interesting and really describes why listening can be such a challenge. So we are, generally speaking, about 150 words per minute, but our brains actually have the capacity to hear upwards of 1,000 words per minute. And that leaves a lot of extra time for our brains to be doing other things. So while we might be listening, we might also be thinking about what's for dinner, or what's the next thing that I have to do, or what is our response going to be? And there's many, many blocks to listening that come up during this extra time. And when you're cognizant of those blocks, you're more likely to be able to stop the habit of letting them creep in. And I just want to highlight a few. One of them is when we totally check out. We just completely lose our train of whatever it is they're saying. We move into whatever else it is we want to be thinking about. So obviously, we're not really listening anymore when that happens. Another common one is that we will be preparing our argument or what we're going to say back. This is called defensive listening. You're also not truly listening when you're doing that. You're not seeking to understand when you are, in fact, preparing your own response. So that's number two. And number three is when we are trying to solve someone else's problem. So we immediately go into advice mode. And although sometimes this is appropriate and warranted, oftentimes it's not actually what someone is wanting. They're wanting to truly be listened into, which is when you're really seeking to understand another person's position. So I would love to hear from you guys what you've found with your clients in order to help them learn to be more of a listening into rather than some of these other kind of habits that tend to happen.
Yeah, I think this is, as you say, a very great topic to be considering and thinking about. And it is one of those things where we have to learn in many ways to be better listeners. I know for myself, when we've looked at the blocks to listening, one of the things that I do is I identify with people's stories. And then what I want to do is share my experience that relates. And it takes the person who's talking to me off topic, and it's a sort of switch tracks. And so I try really hard not to do that. Another thing that I've thought about is the concept of sort of stimulus and response. And so in listening, there's always the opportunity to pause in the middle of a conversation. And so instead of interjecting, how do we hold our thoughts and wait until the end of the conversation? And I remember one coaching client discussing with this, the ability to just make notes without taking away from the face-to-face eye contact, just make a few notes. And so when your time is ready and the person has completed their thoughts, you can go back to what you wanted to say. And so it just allows the person to complete what they've said before you share your experience.
That's a great tip. Love that. How about you, Carol?
So this is actually a common coaching issue for many of my clients, and probably, Jill, for you and Louisa as well, where they're not listening enough, they're missing things. One of the tools I use is something done by Julian Treasure, who's had a couple great TED Talks about listening, and he uses the term RASA, R-A-S-A. And R is for receive, to be able to receive the information that's being shared with you. A is for appreciating it, just like we're doing on this video right now, the nodding, the pausing, sometimes as a way that the recipient understands that you are actually listening to them. S is often overlooked, and that's around the summarize. So what I heard you say, Louisa, is, and it sounds like there are two options to be able to do that. Is that correct? So summarizing what you heard to make sure it's aligned with what the speaker is saying and that it shows that you're actually listening. And then the final A in RASA is when you ask. So inquire about, so what's the next step? What do you need me to do? What shall we get done together? I'd also use that A, in addition to ask, is act, because that's when the next response should be. So often in times, we just move and accelerate from one thing to the other. So I think RASA is a really good tool to have in your back pocket that I've used with some of my coaching clients. Another one is the idea of sort of this listening position. And what I mean by that, and this is something that came from Julian Treasure as well, is what is the position you're taking when you're listening? Are you actively listening to the person because you are going to need to take action as a result of what gets said, or they're looking for your opinion or your insight? Or is it passive, that you are in a group of participants listening to what's being said? Is it from a standpoint of you're needing to critique something, providing some additions to some feedback? Or is it just to be empathetic, to listen, really listen into what someone has said? So I think that listening position is maybe an art and not a science, but it's not something that people naturally do. If they're listening at all, they're just like, okay, listen, response. When in fact, we can be able to just take that 10 seconds to say, what kind of position should I take in this situation? And what I also say to clients is, when in doubt, just pause. And Jill, you alluded to that as well. The ability to take a step, and I'll say in my head, happy birthday, or whatever a phrase might be, to give me a moment. And sometimes it's just giving me a moment to calm down. Sometimes it's beginning to think about my response, and all three of us, I know, do this when we're doing 360 interviews with clients and on behalf of our clients. Sometimes that pause has the speaker say, oh yeah, and one more thing. And so by allowing that pause, it gives them permission to think deeper and reflect more. So, I think those are some tools that I would say that I use in the process. And I also think it's important to think about how amazing it is when you're quiet, that you can hear so much more. That pause is so critical. Anne LeClaire wrote a book that I've admired, and actually show it right here, is really lots of pages turned over about listening below the noise. And she's an author who she would just take these days and then weeks of time where she'd be silent and just listen into herself. And it seems like a luxury for all of us to be able to do that. But what if we were to take moments of listening below the noise? So just a few things from my perspective, my toolkit. Louisa, any other thoughts that you might have?
No, I really love that. I've not heard the expression listening position. And of course, I immediately started thinking of, what does that mean? Like something you do with your body, like a position. And so, but then when you described it further, I understood what you were saying. But I do also think there is a little bit of a listening position, and that we do need to be aware of what our body language is doing. So I would say also be very cognizant. You did mention the nodding and the sort of acknowledgement and the eye contact, but there's something even more about that, of kind of leaning in. So even in Zoom, you can kind of lean in to really like make sure that people know that you are truly listening. And it helps me when I'm feeling that way to make sure I am fully engaged and not distracted with all the noise and going on around me. So that's another tip to think about.
Great. Well, we've got a few more tools on today's program to give you a sense of some other ways and directions to go to. But as I said, it's amazing what you can hear when you're quiet. So hoping you can take a few quiet moments today and just listen in or listen into. Thanks for today, and take good care.